Specialist 5th class, E5 pay grade.
E5?
Yeah. They don't have that anymore.
They don't?
That grade now. Well, I have E5, but they don't have Specialist 5th class anymore.
Why, they retired it after you?
Well, I use sergeants now, I guess. So.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
Well, I was drafted, and then I wanted to go into intelligence service in the Army, because that was where I was headed in civilian life. So I enlisted to get into that school.
So you enlisted in the United States Army?
Yes.
Do you remember the date?
26 March 1968.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living in New Britain, in my hometown.
Why did you join?
Well, like I
Why
said,
did you pick the intelligence part of it?
I was a college graduate, and I was in the process of getting a job with the Central Intelligence Agency. So I had taken all the exams, I had done all the interviews, passed my security clearance, FBI checks and all that stuff. And all I had to do was pass a lie detector test. That was the last part of getting the job. I had a job offer from CIA. So when I got my draft notice, that was the end of that. And I didn't realize that I could have enlisted for 2 years in the Army at that time. Nobody told me. And I had a recruiter that was after me. He wanted me to go to intelligence school because I had studied a couple of years of Russian in college. And Monterey, California was where the school was. It would have been nice to be there, but I wasn't that confident. 3 years later, I also went to graduate school. I wasn't confident that I could last through the course with the Russian. So I figured, well, I'll probably end up learning Vietnamese and getting sent to Vietnam anyways. So, I didn't realize that I could have enlisted. And then when I got my draft notice, you couldn't enlist, of course. For 2 years, you had to enlist for 3 years. So I could have picked intelligence school.
You'd gone for only 2, and instead you got 3.
Yeah. So he was after his quota, unfortunately.
Do you recall your first days in service?
Oh, yes.
Can you describe that?
Actually, even before my enlistment, I was supposed to report to New Haven 2 weeks earlier, and I did. So we took the bus down from New Britain to the recruiting center in New Haven, and I was having stomach problems. So I was going through my physical, and I was complaining about the stomach problems. Turns out, they thought I might have an appendicitis attack coming on. So they put me on a train from New Haven to Berlin, and my recruiter was, my buddy, picked me up in Berlin and brought me to New Britain General Hospital. And it turns out I didn't have appendicitis. The white cell count was all right, but I had gastroenteritis. So I got recycled later, and went down to New Haven the 26th of March. And I ended up with most of the people in my basic training outfit were from Bridgeport. So I was an outsider in that unit. But they were good guys. And went to Fort Dix for my basic training.
Fort Dix, New Jersey?
New Jersey, yes.
How long was that for?
Well, basic training was 8 weeks. And
do you remember your basic training days?
Oh, yes. Well, the one thing that I remember about my first days in the Army was that they gave us like clothing allotments at midnight, this big heavy coat. It was winter, but we had all this bag and baggage and this heavy coat, and our clothing issue, and we had to drag it around, and then they were making us run with it, So that night I didn't get much sleep. I was in an old barracks, drafty barracks, and I was a college graduate, but I was still,
Were you older than most of the other
Yes,
guys there then
yeah.
at the time?
yeah. So I was 24 years old. And almost 24. So, it was a tough night. And then the other thing I remember is that we had to bring our luggage. We got off the bus and brought our luggage and lined it up. And I had 2 locks on my duffel bag. I guess I had a duffel bag at that time. That's when we were going to our regular barracks. So we had duffel bags and all. So I had 2 locks on it, and we were all lined up, hurry up and run, and the drill sergeant and all. So he said, "Go get your baggage." So I ran to what I thought was my bag, but I only had 1 lock on it. And I grabbed it and put it on my shoulder and got back in formation. I thought, is this my bag or not? It was, but even then, I was a college graduate, but it was intimidating. And I don't know if you want to talk more about basic.
Yeah, do you remember any of your instructors or what basic was like?
Well, Sergeant Martin was, James Martin was the drill sergeant. He was a pretty good guy.
Sergeant Martin, not James Martin from Canton.
So he was colored? Probably not. Not that he couldn't be in Canton. He was from the South. And Corporal Brown, he would get us up in the morning and say, "Unass that bunk." So he was the bad guy. These guys were all back from Vietnam. So Sergeant Martin was pretty good guy. He got on me a little bit. But it's funny how in basic, the Army is trying to build your confidence. So we started off, we had these certain things we had to do as part of physical training, the crawl and the bars. You had to do the bars before you could go to breakfast. And some of the other physical training tests. Well, the first crawl they had us do, I think it was maybe 30 yards. I don't know how long the crawl was. It was all in sand, loose sand, and the sand's getting in our nose, and you're supposed to keep your butt down, and the guy's walking by you, make sure your butt's down. And your throat's all clogged up, and you thought, "Oh my God, I'll never get through this." Well, by the 8th week, in the bars were always loose when you walked the bars. So by the 8th week, when we had our last physical training test, they had canvas on top of the sand, so you just zoomed along on your crawl, and they heated the bars, so you just grabbed along, and it's just so that your score would be higher at the end than it was at the beginning. Again, that's the psychological build-up, that confidence build-up that they have in the Army.
Did it work?
I guess, yeah. I mean, you don't realize until later how much training you absorbed. I have another incident later on when I was...
Did you realize when you were in basic that you were going to be going to Vietnam, or they hadn't told you yet?
You pretty much figured you were going to Vietnam. Yes.
So overall, how would you describe basic training?
It was a good experience. Again, at the beginning it was demeaning, but by the end, you were prepared as a soldier.
Were you in the intelligence unit yet?
No, that was my next assignment.
Okay, so you left Fort Dix?
Fort Dix.
Where did you go?
I went to Fort Holabird, Maryland, which was on the outside.
Holabird?
Holabird. Holabird. That's where they sent John Dean to jail after the Nixon scandals.
And how long did you spend at Fort Holabird?
That was 10 weeks. I got there in June. It was kind of a tumultuous time. Like the first week I was at basic training, Martin Luther King was killed. And fortunately the Army knew enough. We were talking about, we're going to go to Trenton, and there were riots all over the place, of course. So we thought, oh, we're going to be going to Trenton and and riot control and all that stuff. Well, fortunately, the Army knew better than to send us there. But the first week I was at Fort Holabird, Robert Kennedy was assassinated in California. So I woke up in the morning and was wondering how he had done in the primary. He had won the primary, but whoever came to wake us up in the morning said he had been shot. And so 1968 was a tough year in our country. So I was at the intelligence school there. It's in the outskirts of Baltimore. I went back there about 5 years ago, and all that's left is the old officers club.
Really?
We used to go swimming there, but it's an
use
industrial.
now?
There's a local military historical function going there, but the rest of it is a big industrial park. As I went to visit Fort Baltimore, we were staying in Baltimore with my kids, and so I'm going to go find Fort Holabird. And I kind of knew where it was, but I had to ask around, and I just couldn't believe it. It was just...
Did you take any pictures?
No, I didn't.
So you're 10 weeks at Fort Holabird. What did they train you?
Well, the basics of intelligence, intelligence gathering, how to write reports, map skills, how to take information from the field units and discern what's important and what's not.
So it was more academic than physical training?
Oh, yes, yes.
Do you remember any of your instructors from Fort Holabird?
Not by name. There was one sergeant that was kind of a problem. He some of the guys I hung around with used to go into Baltimore City and get in trouble, and I didn't do that. They had I think they call it the Strip, or there was a section of Baltimore that was notorious, but I wasn't into that. So, but they were still guys I hung around with, so they get in trouble, and the sergeant kind of associated me with them, and he tried to get me away from that group and whatnot, and he was giving me a hard time. You're not going to get your promotion. I think it was probably to Private E2. So there was a little conflict about that, and I still hung around with the guys on the post. But one of the last exams that we were having, my back gave out. I kind of had back trouble even when I entered the service, and my back gave out. And I know that the last test, I didn't know if I could make it because you had to walk out to where the testing was. But I hobbled out there, and I was a good student, so I scored well on the test and increased the average for the whole class, So he was impressed by my initiative and put me in for promotion. So.
So you were promoted?
Yeah. I mean, generally, people were promoted after length of time, but there were certain points, like graduating from your intelligence school, you would get the next pay grade. And I still had to pass the test and get, the recommendation of the officers and the sergeant. So I got promoted on time anyway through that effort.
Where did you go after Fort Holabird?
Well, I went home. I know I was going to Vietnam.
Oh, by then you'd
So
gotten your...
yeah,
How long did you have for leave at home?
about a month. What happened was you could ask for certain areas to go to as part of at the end of your intelligence school. Excuse me. And the previous class, a lot of them had gone to Europe, actually. It's just they kind of sent you where you were needed at the time. Well, most everybody's going to Vietnam. So generally the choices were Europe, Korea, or Vietnam, and I thought, well, I'm going to Vietnam anyway, so I put Europe. But the guys that put Korea were sent to Korea, which and I was sent to Vietnam, of course. And but it's funny though. Well, those guys, a lot of them were the ones I hung around with that were always in trouble. They had trouble over in Vietnam and after with drugs and whatnot. So it wasn't a great assignment for them anyway. But so I knew I was going to Vietnam, and I got there the 6th of October once.
You got to Vietnam?
Yeah, I went a little bit early to
6th
San
of
Francisco.
October?
Yeah,
68?
1968. I went to check out San Francisco a few days before I shipped out. So I went to a Patriots football game there and saw the city. And then I went back to Oakland Army Base and was shipped out from there. They took us up to Travis Air Force Base and we flew Hawaii, Okinawa. We stopped. That's where I saw my first war-related, there were a lot of Marines injured, beat up coming back through Okinawa. So it was a little prelude to Vietnam. And it was like a 23-hour plane trip, so it was halfway around the world.
Where did you land in Vietnam?
Benoit Air Force Base, or Air Base.
How do you spell Benoit?
B-I-E-N, and then H-O-A, 2 words.
Where's that located?
That was northeast of Saigon. It was in the 3 Corps area.
What was your first impression on landing in Vietnam?
I was impressed with the heat and humidity. The smell. And after we got off the plane, we got on a bus that had grates, metal grates on the windows, so they couldn't throw in grenades or whatever. So you knew right off the bat that anybody could be your enemy there. So then my first shower was a thunderstorm, and it was cold water at night. And I was at the replacement area for a few days, and didn't know where I was going in country. So you'd go out several times a day, and they'd call your name or not, and then you go back to KP or other details they had you doing there. And I was with some of the guys that I was with in intelligence school. But I finally got my call, and I thought, I'd be getting ready to go on a helicopter ride somewhere. But a Jeep pulls up, and I go about a mile down the road to my unit. So it was headquarters company of the 2nd Field Force, which was they were in charge of 3 Corps.
3 Corps?
Yep. Vietnam was divided into 4 corps. The bottom was the Delta, so there was I Corps, and then the Highlands, and then 3 Corps and the Delta. So it was Saigon and the surrounding provinces.
Where was your actual company located? Outside of Saigon?
No, it was between Long Binh and Benoit. So Benoit Air Base was here, my unit was here. It was called the Plantation Area. And then Long Binh Post was here. So they're all within a couple or 3 miles of each other.
And what job assignment did you get when you got to headquarters company?
I was assigned to G2 Plans and Operations.
G2?
G2 is intelligence at a higher level. There's S2 would be a lower level, like the units in the field. But G2 was a pretty high level. I think because I had a master's degree, I was assigned to a higher unit.
What were your duties?
At first I started out working on reports. One report was the ORLL, Operational Report, Lessons Learned. And then I was doing like interdiction reports and detainee reports. Interdiction reports were instances where culverts were blown or roads blown up, or where there booby traps, mines, those kinds of incidents. Keeping track of where those were and like where concentrated areas of where those were, so we could warn or let the people in the field know where the more critical areas are. Not that they might not know already, but and there were several other reports, general high-level campaign reports that it was like a dry season report and a wet season campaign report, that type thing.
How long did you stay at headquarters company?
Well, I was there, signed there for a year, like most veterans were.
So you spent your entire year in Vietnam at
Well,
headquarters?
no. In December, my mother died, December 12th. So I was sent home for a little over a month on emergency leave.
Does that extend your time in
No,
Vietnam?
no.
So after you went back to the same place?
Yes. And in March the next year, I became the permanent intelligence summary writer, INSUM, INTSUM writer, and that involved taking the intelligence reports of the various intelligence units in the field and summarizing them, the major activities, into one document. And I have copies that I got at the National Archives over the last 5-6 years. I've done it a few times, and they were declassified, so I actually got copies of some of the reports that I worked on. So that was interesting.
Wow.
But this was sent up for it's both a historical record and also a planning record, because they could, besides the enemy units that were in the area, they could see where the greater activity was, and it helped to. I didn't realize this till later, till I read other reports that are at the archives. You kind of think you're a small cog in a big wheel, but a lot of the work that you did was helped save lives. You didn't realize it, because the units were warned about certain areas that were bad to be in, and so that was my contribution. We recorded the activities, where the engagements were, the coordinates, what the units involved were, the size of the units, what kind of weapons were used in the fights, and the casualty reports on both sides, killed, wounded, captured.
How did you get the data from the field?
Well, again, the intelligence analysts that were in the field
Would come to you?
they would write their report for their unit. There were maybe 8-10 units, different kind. We had some Australian, some Thai forces as well, and they would summarize the activity in that area for the day, and then I would pick out the major elements of those after those reports were sent to me at the headquarters.
Did you ever have to go out into the field?
I didn't stray too much from my office. We went to Ben Hoa for briefings with the South Vietnamese counterparts. And
How was that?
again, because I had a master's degree, it was like the first couple weeks I was there, they thought I was high-level intelligence, spit and polish type, they were hoping. So we're at this briefing, and they had the American side on one side of and the South Vietnamese counterpart on the other side with they'd have like charts and whatnot and maps. So I had to, went through these preparations for this meeting, and I thought General Abrams was going to be there, but he wasn't. And but I wasn't very military, so I'm like casually standing and pointing to the proper things. I didn't mess up that way, but the South Vietnamese counterpart was like, attention snapping and with his pointer to the. So I got chewed out afterwards, that I wasn't very military, and I didn't bother me.
Did
But
you
I
have
never
to work with the South Vietnamese other than just being at the same meeting?
Not too much, no. They took me off that detail. So I wasn't ever at briefings after that. But I had other work to do.
Did you see combat?
No. We took rocket fire. The second Tet Offensive, we were all on a perimeter, and rockets came in on the perimeter. I thought there was just one, but there were more than one. Because in Vietnam, we had bunkers. We had perimeters on both sides. The front side was where the streets were, and the back side was more open. There was a big ammo dump on the other side of the field, and I always figured that would be where the enemy would come. And that's where I was on guard duty. And we were all out there, but the bunkers tended to have rats, and they're all wet and stuff. So we always slept outside, either on top of the bunker or on the dirt, So I'm out there, and I hear this crack. And
You were out there sleeping or on
sleeping.
guard
No,
duty?
I was sleeping. Some were on guard, usually at 3-hour shifts. So there were three-hour shifts from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. So I wasn't on an active wake post shift. We had wake posts and sleep posts too. So every other one was like a sleep post. So
What do you
you were
mean,
there.
Like if there was one guy here and another guy here, another guy here?
So you have different series of bunkers, but not everyone was. There was a firing post and sleeping post. So firing posts were more fortified, and they were manned. Excuse me, and the other posts were, you were there in case some action happened, but you could sleep through the whole night.
So you would get assigned to a post, so they said you're on firing post, you would go to that spot.
Right. And so when the rocket came in, I was on an air mattress, I think, but I grabbed my rifle, my helmet, my glasses, and just booked.
You knew right away what it was?
When I heard that crack, yeah. So we're all in this bunker, right, and we have a M60 machine gun, and we're all looking at each other like, does anybody know how to use this? Because we were, we had...
Anybody?
No. I guess I don't know, we probably might have figured out. But we were waiting for a ground attack, because usually rockets preceded a ground attack. And I don't know how many guys were in there, but of course we were all concentrated. If they had satchel charges, we would have been wiped out, And again, we got this weaponry that we weren't trained on. Because we had cooks, and we had, there was a headquarters company, we had clerks, and we didn't have any infantry assigned. So, and some of my buddies that night, they got ground attacks, like in Long Bin Post. They got overrun. Some of the posts got overrun, and the bunkers got overrun. So they were casualties. So that wasn't that far away, within 3 miles or so.
Were you in communication with the other posts around there?
No, we had a
So
talk.
you didn't know it at the time?
Right, we had a tactical operations center underground that they had built when I was there, and that's where they kept track of everything in 3 Corps. They had big maps and areas where you could, where all the information came in the real
And
time.
that's where you were located? Is that where that tactical center?
That was on our base, yeah. So I went there the next morning, and I could see all the activity that happened the night before. But, fortunately we didn't get a ground attack. So that was my one. But you still, I tell the kids in schools when we talk to them, you have this fight or flight. So that's where the Army training came in, you know, that
You didn't have to think twice.
I just did it, you know. And when you think back, you say, geez, you're getting fired on you. The tendency might be to head the other way, but, you know, again, the training that we got worked, I guess. Confidence building, and you know, you knew what your job was, and you know, like it is now, you protect your buddies. You know that feeling.
Can you remember any memorable experiences while you were in Vietnam?
Again, you know, the thing with my mother, you know, affected me post Vietnam. I had a it wasn't officially recognized, but I had like a post-traumatic stress disorder, or an adjustment disorder, I guess they kind of said I might have, but I was never compensated for it by the VA. But you know, my mother, she was living with my father, but she had a heart attack and died, and I'm halfway around the world, you know. And I was the youngest son. So, you know, it affected me. Like Super Bowl Sunday, I had a panic attack, anxiety attack, and I didn't know what it was, you know. I was home and watching a football game, and my brother took me to the VA hospital of Newington, and they gave me a shot, sedative, calm me down. But I probably should not have been sent back to Vietnam, you know. But I was getting ready to ship out. It was probably the last week I was home. And the next day, they sent me to Westover Air Force Base and talked to somebody there. And they filled out a form. I never even put it into my medical file. Again, after the incident happened, you kind of thought it was an isolated thing, and you didn't think much of it. And, you know, I guess I was kind of embarrassed about it. So I never put it in as a medical incident. And later, when I was working with the Veterans Administration on claims and stuff, you know, it wasn't even in my record. I had a copy of it, but it wasn't enough, because post-traumatic stress disorder is more incident related to, you know, action, military action, as opposed to something like your mother's death. And that was, they usually have to have a couple of these, so that was just one incident. But it certainly affected me after. Some of the things about Vietnam at the time, there's always talk about peace, you know, peace accord, peace talks, and so you had that hope that you would be going home, because, you know, everybody wanted to go home, basically. And so that was kind of a difficult part of that year, that you have these ongoing, you thought, well, you know, they had a ceasefire for something, and you thought the war would be over and you can go home. So, but it never happened in the year I was there. And then some of the incidents that happened, you know, I remember the B-52 strikes where the ground would shake, and you could see the gunships with it was like a ray of red fire that you could just see, and it just came steady ray that, I forget how much, like the size of a football field would be covered with bullets. I forget how far apart, but it was pretty effective in some of the gunships we had. So there was some nasty stuff thrown at the enemy out there. And you know, you wake up in the night, you could hear the B-52, the ground would be shaking, and, you know, it would be like thump, 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 and the bombs hitting the ground. And some of the incidents that I had to write up, I guess the worst was, evidently there was a box on top of a bunker, and a helicopter shot at it, probably just messing around. And there was ammunition in it, and it exploded and blew up and knocked down the helicopter.
It knocked down the helicopter
Yeah.
that shot at it?
Yeah. So I had to write right up. That was one of the incidents I wrote up, and but you think about it, you know, kind of a silly thing that happens. And on my post, we only had one death, and that was a suicide. The year before, the first Tet offensive, you know, the enemy was at the gate, and the MPs got him. So there was never a penetration of our sector, but they blew up the ammo dump. They shoot at the ammo dump a lot, and some of the shrapnel would fly all the way across. It was a good distance across this field, but so you knew there was danger. And one of the details that we had was to pick up cigarette butts and cans and stuff, you know, police an area. And I still remember to this day, and I tell the kids about it, talk to the schools. So you see like a can of soda on the ground, and again, maybe it's booby trapped, who knows. So do you kick it first, or you pick it up, you know? So it's like, what would you rather lose, a hand or an arm, you know? So you have that in the back of your mind when you're doing these police details. And in Vietnam, the enemy could be anywhere, you know, like, and we had mama sons that worked there that did cleaning and or, you know, laundry and stuff. And they'd start chattering, you knew something was happening, or they wouldn't come to work. Like the second Tet offensive, there was a lot of chatter before, and then they didn't show up, you know, because they knew what was coming down. So there were a lot of incidents like that. I guess the only body I saw was we went to Benoit, and a military deuce and a half, a big truck had run over a guy on a bicycle, so he was by the truck there. But I didn't go very far. I went to 3-day R&R in Vung Tau, in-country R&R.
Where was that?
Down by the coast. It's V-U-N-G and then T-A-U. It was an old French resort area. And you got one in-country R&R and an R&R out-of-country.
Where did you do your out-of-country R&R?
Hong Kong. So I was going to go to either Australia or Hong Kong, and I decided on Hong Kong.
How long was that for?
Well, it was 3 days.
Oh, that's all it ever was 3 days?
Yeah, and it was interesting. I spoke some French, and I was going on this tour bus, and there was a guy that was with that same company that was driving a couple from France that was going around the world, and he found out I could speak French somehow, so I was kind of the interpreter for him. So I got to drive in this nice air-conditioned car and a special treatment on my R&R. So that was.
So what else did you do while you were in Hong Kong on your 3 days?
A lot of shopping. I went up to see some of the sights. Went up to the Chinese border. There's a train station there, and I was walking on a side path, and there was a rope across, like a road area, and I looked across, and there's a Chinese communist with his gun, and I almost went like, I must have been in uniform. I can't remember. Probably not, though. And I want to step in China, you know, and I thought, well, you know, he might not know how these guys react, so I didn't. He might have pulled his weapon out and shot me. Who
So
knows?
you didn't step over the border?
I didn't. No, his discretion was the better part of valor, I guess they say.
What did you do on your 3-day R&R in country?
Went to the beach. You know, they fed us well. They had some USO areas and whatnot. Drank some, you know, especially in country, you get off the bus and there's all these kids on carriages trying to get customers for their sisters and stuff. It's pretty bad. But I didn't get into that. Or the drug scene. You know, there was some drugs on the post, but
There were?
yeah, like this guy that committed suicide. He was kind of messed up.
On drugs?
Yeah. I'm trying to find his name because he's on the wall, of course, in Vietnam, but some of the guys I've contacted, they haven't helped me with his name. One time he and I and this other guy from Texas were on a wake post on the front. And I had the first shift, so I had 9 to 12, and I woke up the next guy. So I went to sleep. Well, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the officer of the guard comes by, and all three of us are asleep. So he and this guy from Texas were arguing about who woke up who, and who didn't wake up who, and all, you know. So nothing ever happened to either of them from that, but, you know, again, later he killed himself.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Besides the campaign medals, you know, for service in Vietnam, I was given an award of Bronze Star for meritorious service, and generally the intelligence summary writer got that. You know, kind of went with the job because it was, looking back now, I realize it was more important of a job than it seemed at the time. And again, until I was at the archives and read other reports about the value of the intelligence and getting those reports out as far as decision making, I kind of poo-pooed, you know, the Bronze Star because again, it kind of went with the job. But you know, I was more appreciative of it, reading other reports about the contribution that our intelligence outfit made, and you know, I was part of that. So I got a good conduct medal. I was in Colorado, my last assignment.
I'm going to ask you a little bit about the living conditions. How did you stay in touch with your family?
A lot of letter writing, and we did these tapes that I was talking to you about. So, you know, I have the tape, the last tape my mother was on.
So you would record a tape, these are the old reel-to-reel tapes,
Yes.
and send it to the United States,
Yes.
and then they would record one and send it back to
Yeah,
you?
like-
You had a tape player over here,
Yes.
so you could hear it?
Yeah, I still have it, but I'm not sure if it works anymore. But, you know, like holidays, like Thanksgiving, it was a big holiday for us. And I have that tape where, you know, all the family was together talking to me, and like my nephews and nieces. So I want to get that on cassette tapes at some point, and you know, maybe their kids can hear what their parents sounded like when they were young.
That would be neat.
Yeah.
That must have been encouraging when you receive a tape over.
Yes. Yeah. And the thing, when I was on emergency leave, after a while, my buddies set me up on a blind date. So that's,
The United States?
yeah. So it was January 4th. My mother died December 12th. So I was getting ready to go back. I still had another couple weeks, I guess. And so I went on this blind date and kind of hit it off. And we had a few dates after that. So the second part of my tour in Vietnam, I was writing with my future wife.
Yeah. Did you phone home at all, or just tape?
No. That wasn't as big a thing as it is now. Of course, now they have cell phones and all, and email. I think there was a capacity to maybe in the bigger cities, but I just never thought of it. I never, I don't know if I didn't have the money even, you know, just, it wasn't part of the culture, I guess, back then.
Did you save any of your letters?
Oh yeah, I have all my letters.
Oh.
Yeah.
What was the food like?
It wasn't bad. You know, they tried to do special things like 4th of July or Thanksgiving. You know, we'd have turkey, and 4th of July we had steak, big steak bash. And
You had 3 meals a day cooked right
Yes.
there at headquarters?
yes, yeah.
No sea rations for you?
Just when we were on the guard, all-day guard sometime, during heavier times of activity, they'd give us rations out there. So I did try it. I think I had lima beans and ham. It was pretty bad, but I just wanted to try it.
Did you have enough supplies and resources in headquarters?
Pretty much. One of the most critical items was whiteout, because we type up these reports, the intelligence summary, and if you had mistakes, you'd try to white it out, and that was like gold back then, so you could type over, because you didn't want to type the whole report over. And, we had thermofax machines, which were always breaking down, but that's what you used to copy some of the stuff you did. But I had a weapon, the M14. I didn't get the M16 like the Arvins got. And I had two clips. So when we had that rocket attack, I loaded the clip. It was a little bit rusty. I'm not a very military person. But I never had to chamber the round because there was no attack. But
Did you feel any pressure or stress?
oh yeah, I mean, you're aware of your potential imminent death. I wrote about it in my diary and letters home, and it depends on who I was writing to.
How did you cope with the stress?
Well, took breaks. They had clubs on the post. Went there. They had a U.S. I forget. It wasn't USO, but there was a facility, privately run. They had these donut dollies that volunteered there, so you could go there and you could record tapes and whatnot. But we had clubs. Mostly hang out in the hooches at night, drinking beer and writing letters, and listening to music.
Did you have any more anxiety attacks once you got back to Vietnam?
No. I just felt strange when I came back stateside. Like the day, my future wife picked me up at the airport, and we came back actually to this room, and it was really, I felt different, even from when we first met, and it was quite an adjustment. In Vietnam, you were in a war zone one day, and you're back in the States and the world the next day. I tell the kids in school that now they have decompression times, and World War II they got on a ship with their buddies, and took a while to get back to the States, and Vietnam was a problem with that, especially for somebody that was in combat, and then the reception that some of them got back home.
Did you do anything special for good luck?
Well, no, but I knew I had my aunt, my last surviving aunt now, was a nun, is a nun in Canada, and she had all those nuns praying for me. So I knew I was in good shape there.
How did you entertain yourself while you were over there and your fellow buddies at the post?
Well, again, we listened to music. We went to the club sometimes.
Did you have USO shows or anything like that?
We had one. It was a small group, and I just wanted to go because it was USO coming.
What was the show?
It was just a small group that was singing and dancing.
Wasn't Bob Hope? Or...
No. I was back home on emergency leave when I saw Bob Hope on TV back in Long Bin, I think, which was the next big post from where I was. And I was home on leave, so I saw him on TV. But I appreciated what they were doing and driving to our little area, which was fairly safe. But some of those places they went to weren't as
Did you
safe.
do anything else for recreation?
We had a swimming pool. We had
Real one?
Well, it was an above ground canvas bag pool filled with water that some of the guys came in from the field would shoot at because they were upset about where they were out in the field, and we had a nicer area. They had basketball court and stuff. We played basketball, but The pool was out of commission several times.
What did you do?
Till they patched it.
Plug the holes up?
They'd have to patch it, yeah.
Where else did you travel while you were in the service? To Hong Kong and your in-country R&R. Did you go anywhere else?
Well, I went back and forth twice to the States, so I was three times at Hawaii at the international airport and never got outside. So I tell people I was in Hawaii 3 times. But all I saw was like
The airport.
they had gardens in back with a statue of Sun Yat-sen, who I had studied about in college, and so I stopped in Okinawa, stopped in Guam, stopped in Japan, but again, always at the airport.
Did you travel anywhere else within Vietnam?
Not really. I went to Tan Son Nhut Air Force Air Base to get the R&R flight, and went to Ben Hoa a few times, a Long Bin post, which was, again, pretty close, so I wasn't very adventuresome in that regard.
Did you ever get your helicopter ride?
No.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
In Vietnam,
Yes.
well, we had,
Like
I had
somebody
a
tell me how
roommate.
they play jokes on each other.
yeah, I had a roommate. Yeah, he played a joke, which, again, I was toward the end of my tour, and I was having trouble. Put bacon in my coffee. It was like within the last couple weeks when I was leaving, and last month, and he did it as a joke, but I didn't realize it, but I was having trouble because of my mother's death still, and we had a falling out, and it was kind of a sad way to end because we never had that bond after the war where we'd communicated. I tried to contact him a few times, but never got through, or he never returned letters and stuff. So, but earlier we had this joke about I had to sweep the company street as part of a detail. It was where between the hooches, and they had like movie. We watch movies every week. They'd have a recreation building there. They had like a library and books and stuff. And so some of the time, generally I was exempt from duty because I was the intelligence summary writer. But sometimes I'd have to dig latrines or pull guard, wake posts on guard. But I had to sweep the company street, so my roommate gave me a certificate, the golden broom, which I still have in my...
Were you a good sweeper?
He got a kick out of it. But...
Well, were you the only military intelligence on your post? How many of you intelligence guys were there?
I'd say I was part of a group of, say, 6. We had 2 buildings.
How many people would you say were on your post, this ballpark? And how big?
Excuse me, I'd say about 150.
So there was like half a dozen of you that were military. What were all?
Well, they were all military. We had cooks and clerks, but actual people that were involved in the intelligence part that I was working with. I had a sergeant over me, and then a major I worked for, and there was a colonel, and up the line.
So what were all the other people that were on that? There were cooks, clerks. All the big wheels were there?
Yeah, we had generals there. They'd fly off to Thailand or whatnot to get together with their wives, and they had their own mess, so they were cared for pretty well. So Major General Kerwin was the head of our unit. He was a great guy. And then every once in a while, General Abrams would pop in for these big briefings they had. But there was a band there, I guess. There were other units as part of that compound.
Did you guys that were in the military intelligence stick together Were you all located together and in the same barracks or spread out?
We were pretty much together, yeah. Yeah. I think we had maybe 20 guys in the barracks. We had a big sign at the short timers sign that we used to put on the ceiling. So when you left, your name was erased and then you moved up. So you're always looking when you were at the top of the
That must have been a great
chart.
feeling when
Yeah.
your name was on the top.
Yeah.
Can you recall any of the officers or your fellow soldiers that you were in Vietnam with?
Yeah, I mean, there was my roommate. He was a clerk.
Your roommate?
Yeah, he,
What was his name?
Skip Esterly.
Esther Lee is one name?
Esterley, I believe. And he was from New York City, Staten Island. He worked in the post office there. He processed the mail that came in.
Now, this is the guy that put the bacon in your car?
Yeah, yeah.
So were you there with him most of the time?
Yeah.
You were over there?
Yeah, the whole time.
So you were good friends? But
Yeah, he was very neat, and I was very sloppy. We have a picture of our lockers
Yeah.
next to each other, and his is all orderly, and mine is a mess. But he was a good guy. We had, till the end, we had a good relationship, and we both had girlfriends after, when I came back. And I worked for Major Stein, who was, nobody liked him. He was from Boston.
Did you like him?
No. I had a pen pal in France, and she'd send me letters, and he always wanted the stamps, And,
Was he a stamp collector?
yeah. So he liked me for that part, I guess, because I'd give him stamps sometimes. And then he wanted my watch, because he liked the face of it. He wanted to trade watches, and I wouldn't do that. And he was just a funny guy. Nobody liked him. So it kind of filtered down to me at times, too, because I worked for him.
Oh.
His replacement was Major Melby, and he was from the South. He was a really good guy. So,
Did you form any close friendships over there?
yeah, like this guy from Texas, Carlton Rector. He worked in the next building. He was like a graphics type. And he's one of the guys I contacted to find the name of the guy that shot himself, because we were all in that same guard. And he called back. I wrote him a letter, and he called back and talked to my wife. And then I emailed him and wrote him again, and he never got back to me. And I called him, I just left a message, and I'm not sure what that was about. Maybe he didn't want to relive that part of his life. He'd done very well. Had his own business and whatnot, but
Did you keep a personal diary while you were in Vietnam?
yes,
Did you save it?
yes.
Do you want to share that with the Library of Congress?
Yes, I have the original, and then I transcribed it. So there's a readable part. I don't know if you want both pieces. The actual diary is kind of messy, and toward the end of my tour, you could see, like, I do it every 3 or 4 days. I try to backdate and try to figure out what I did.
Wow.
So
Oh,
it
that
was,
would be great.
but yeah, I have that. I guess all my letters and my diary. Boston College is where I went to undergraduate. They had a Vietnam archives there, so I may donate it to them. I don't know if it's interesting or not. It's kind of mundane. Yeah, I mean, it's part of history, I guess, but the second part of my tour was a lot about whether I got letters or not from my girlfriend.
Well, that's the important thing. What would be a typical day for you? Can you describe what it would be from morning till night?
Well, the intelligence summary, which is my major job, I don't know, I get to work at 8 o'clock, I think we'd start. On Sunday, I'd go to church, and Major Stein was always mad because I'd come in later on Sunday. So we worked 7 days a week.
Where'd you go to church?
They had a chapel on the grounds.
And you had your own chaplain at headquarters?
Yes. Yeah. Chaplain Gaffel. He was the one that broke me the news about my mother. Called me into his office, and I thought he was going to ask me to take part in the church things or something. And kind of floored me that, he had this telegram about my mother. But, so you had breakfast, you had formation in the morning, reveille. Maybe it was 7 o'clock. They'd have to be at work at 8, something like that. And then you had lunch and supper. But during the day, you're working on the summary. And some days would take longer because there'd be more activity. There's more combat out there in the field. So, and at the beginning when I was writing this summary, I wasn't as adept at it. So I'd have some nights I'd finish 9 o'clock. And you'd have to get it typed up, and you'd have to bring it to have it reviewed by the major or colonel. And then you'd bring it to another office where it was disseminated. So, yeah, there's some, again, in my diary, I have some notations, intelligence summaries like 16 pages long, and I was there till 9 o'clock, stuff like that. So when I was intelligence summary writer, I had to work until it was done and, properly signed off on, reviewed and whatnot.
So basically, you were in your office all day.
Yeah, and then if you had guard duty, that started at 9 o'clock. So
you could go right from work to different work.
Yeah, potentially. So again, the 3-hour shifts, and you tried to sleep when you were off shift, but sometimes, some nights were better sleeping than others, and you were sick and stuff sometimes, and you have to go back to work, and you get details.
Sick at all while you were over there?
Yeah, I had strep throat. I had toothaches. I had to, when I got back out of Vietnam, I had an abscess. I had to have an actual tooth removed by my local dentist here. But
Did
I guess
you
that
have
was
a doctor right on post?
Yeah, that was an infirmary there. I had dizzy spells. I think, again, I didn't realize it was related to the anxiety. And so they sent me for a head x-ray at Long Bin Post, the evacuation hospital there. They found nothing wrong with my head. Was that joke? They found nothing in my head. But, I think my back acted up a few times, and we should sleep in the cold and the rain sometime and outside, and it wasn't pleasant. My first guard duty, I had to report. I had no rifle, no helmet, and there was a monsoon that night or something, and I had to slosh through all this water. I got all wet walking to report to my first guard, and I didn't realize I was going to have guard duty, and somebody came up and said, "No, you're on guard duty." It was like the first week I'm there, and I said, "Okay, where do I go? What do I do?"
You took guard duty with no rifle?
Well, I had lent it to somebody. I guess I don't know if I had a helmet or I don't know, I had to borrow one. Again, it's in my diary, but...
Do you recall your last day in Vietnam?
Yes,
What
I
was that
do.
like?
We went out, last couple days before, we went to like a replacement area where guys were coming in but you were leaving, so you hung out in the barracks there waiting to go home. Actually, I never wrote that in my diary. There's like a 3 or 4 day gap because I was going home, So I got to the Benoit Air Base to fly out, and I remember walking, new guys were coming in, and we're walking to the plane, and get on the plane, and we take off, and hit an air pocket, and we started dropping. I thought, oh my God, been in Vietnam for a year, gonna die on the way home. But I don't know, maybe the pilot did it on purpose, who knows, I think it was an air pocket anyways. But that was kind of scary. And the thing is, in Vietnam, we were near the air base, so you saw, we call them freedom birds. You saw the planes coming by all the time. And we, say, well, someday I'm going to be on that
You
plane.
must have felt
So
great
I,
when you finally
yeah, I
were.
finally get on the plane, and I think we cheered when we left the ground, you know, and then soon thereafter we hit an air pocket. So I remember that part very well.
And where did you land when you came back to the United States?
Travis Air Force Base in Colorado, in California. I don't know if I kissed the ground or not. Can't remember, but I might have. But then we were trucked down, flew out of San Francisco International at the time, so I headed back. I had another month leave.
Oh, so actually, you weren't discharged from the service?
No, I still had, so it was in October, I had,
So when was that? When you came back to the United States?
it was October
69?
69, yes. So I still had to go to to March of 1971. So I went home for a month's leave, kind of got familiar with my future wife. 'Cause we had a few dates before I left, and you know, we wrote letters, and letters got kind of serious, you know, like this might work. And so coming back, you know, more dating, and then I went off to Colorado Springs. They had an Air Force base there called ENT, E-N-T, which when I was in Vietnam, I looked up because when I got my orders, I wanted to go to Fort Devens, Mass, to be closer to home, but I couldn't get there. So ENT Air Force Base was downtown, and it was where they had the headquarters for North American Air Defense Command, NORAD.
So you were stationed there then?
Well, first I was assigned to Army Air Defense Command, the Army part of it, ARADCOM, A-R-A-D-C-O-M. My orders were there. That was also downtown, not in the same area as Ant Air Force Base. I was stationed at Peterson Field. That's where the barracks was, which was the military side, and on the other side was the airport for Colorado Springs, so it's a joint use.
And what were your duties there?
Well, evidently when I was on leave, they tried to contact me and tell me that they didn't have any work for me at the Army Air Defense Command. I was assigned there, but there was no work for me, no job. So when I got there, they said, well, we don't have anything for you to do. So again, you know, I had this master's degree, and they had me do like area reports. I think I did area report on Iraq. I'd like to see what I wrote. I'm sure it's probably thrown out somewhere, but
No, the Army
you know,
doesn't.
I read about, you know, wrote about the Kurds and the Sunni and the Shia. I'm sure, you know, I gathered details about it, so it'd be interesting to see what I wrote. But there
How
was,
long were you stationed in Colorado Springs?
well, from October 69 until March of 71.
Oh, you stayed there for the
Yeah,
rest of your
yeah.
service?
After a while, I was transferred to NORAD at the Air Force Base because, they didn't have me. They just had me doing busy work at the Army Air Defense Command. So when I was at NORAD, I was in charge of the library. They had a library there, and
What do you mean you were in charge of the library? You were the librarian?
yeah, I took reports and filed them in the library, and I did other duties with the reports that came in. So
This was a working library where soldiers could come in and take books out?
well,
and stuff?
it was a middle intelligence. You know, it
So it's just
was
archiving all the
locked up and
intelligence
stuff. Yeah. So I would disseminate articles, I guess, and it was very, compared to what I was doing in Vietnam, it was very basic. Lieutenant Colonel Jesse Kelsey was my commander. He was a great guy. He was my best commander. One memory I have of him was that he called me into his office and told me about the Kent State incident and actually apologized to me. I guess he thought because I was younger, you know. But I mean, it was part of the war. It was an unfortunate incident that happened, but they were victims too, the ones that were killed, just like the soldiers in Vietnam that were killed and others. But he was a graduate of VMI, and a really nice guy. I don't know if he's still alive.
That was Lieutenant Kelsey, K-E-L.
Lieutenant Colonel, K-E-L-S-E-Y.
Lieutenant Colonel. Do you remember your last day in service?
Yeah, we had packed up the car to head back, my wife and I had to.
Oh, were you married by now?
Yeah, I got married in June of 1970. So then.
So then your wife went back out to Colorado?
Yeah, I found an apartment. I'd moved out of the barracks, and so we were there about 9 months, I guess, in the apartment. So I mustered out at Fort Carson, Colorado, which was south of Colorado Springs, and everybody wanted to hit the road, you know. And they had packed 2 containers of our household goods and stuff to ship back home, and the military was trying to get people to re-enlist, and the guys, you know, they were generally the attitude was, you know, all right, I'm through with the military, let me out of here. And he says, I'm here all day. If you guys don't want to cooperate, that's all right with me. So everybody kind of shut up after that and just went through the, you know, heard the spiel and went through all the processing. You'd had your exit physical and all that stuff, and they gave you pay, I guess your last pay for unpaid leave and whatnot. So, yeah. So right then the last night before we were in Colorado Springs, my wife and I went to the Broadmoor for dinner, which is a famous resort hotel in Colorado Springs, outside of Colorado Springs. So.
What did you do in the days and the weeks after you were discharged?
We went back and temporarily lived with my wife's parents in Farmington, and my father-in-law was a plumber. He had a plumbing business, so I hung around with him a lot. You know, I was out of work until November, so from that's 10 months, I guess, almost. 9,
So
10
in
months.
that time you lived with your in-laws in Farmington, Connecticut?
Yeah. Yep.
And then what did you do for work?
They had a program called the EEA, Emergency Employment Act, where the federal government found jobs for you in the municipal, in municipalities, and was trying to get veterans back to work. So finally in November I got a job in New Britain, my hometown.
With help from the EEA?
Yeah, I'm not they paid the salary. I'm not sure how it all worked, but I was there for a little over a year. My wife and I got an apartment in New Britain.
What did you do in New Britain? What was your job?
I was recreation specialist, maybe. There was a recreation director I worked directly for. It was just 2 of us main employees. Well, I guess he had a clerk. So it was a small unit, but I ran recreation programs, and I had worked at the Boys Club and done a lot with the Boys Club before I went into service. So I was familiar with recreation activities. So I got a job there. And then after that, I had an opportunity to work for the state of Connecticut. Took a pay cut to go over there. And
what did you do for the state of Connecticut?
well, I worked, at that time it was called the Department of Finance Control. I was a budget analyst. And it later ended up as the Office of Policy and Management. But I was a budget analyst the whole 30 years that I worked for the state. So I retired a year ago, April. So almost 2 years ago now.
And you moved from, did you live in New Britain or Farmington then?
We moved from New Britain to Farmington. My wife was pregnant, and we wanted a bigger place. So we moved to Farmington Avenue in Farmington.
And how many kids?
3 children.
Did any of them go into the service?
No. They're all into health-related activities, so that's their contribution. My youngest is a son. My 2 daughters are older. I have 2 daughters and 1 son. He's an EMT and a nurse. My oldest daughter is a nurse. She works in the OR at Bacchus Hospital. My son works at Massachusetts, at Boston Medical Center in Boston, Mass, in the ER. My middle daughter works in health-related activities and outside of London. She lives outside of London, works in London, University of London, cancer-related research, incidence rates of ovarian cancer. So she was a psychology major, so she's not technically in the medical profession, but she's moving back to San Francisco in April, so she'll be stateside anyway with her husband.
Did you keep up with any of the friendships you had made while you were in the service?
No. Early on, one of the guys in basic training I kept in touch with, and then we lost contact, and then, like my roommate, we had that falling out at the end. And, this other fellow that I tried to contact, that wasn't successful, so. The thing with Vietnam is that at most you were with somebody for a year. And like our unit, we don't have reunions or whatnot.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
You've never had reunions?
No. Again, it was a high-level, core-level outfit, not combat-related. And they didn't, like a lot of the military units have major reunions that anybody can go to, you know. They have a sizable amount of people that to pull from to get a reunion. So nobody's ever. I don't know if I would ever try to get a reunion together. You'd have to get all the names, of course. And
Do you have a roster of all the guys that were in?
well, I have some of my orders that have names of people that were in my unit that were given orders at the same time, or promotions or whatnot. And again, at the National Archives, I thought the chaplain had a list of all the people that were on post. But when I went to get the chaplain's records, they were more like daily reports. And I'm thinking there might be a list of the people that were there.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yes, about 20 years ago, I joined the VFW in Avon. It took a while for me to join.
Why?
Well, when I got out of the service, I was more interested in getting a job and working and family and stuff. And
What's your post number in Avon?
3272.
And you've been a member there for 20 years?
Yes.
Does your post get involved in any community activities?
Oh, yes. We run with the town the Memorial Day Parade. And we have a Veterans Day ceremony. And Veterans Week, about 4 or 5 years ago, what we started to do was some of the members of the post went to the Board of Ed. They had Veterans Day off at the time, and they said, if you have school on Veterans Day, the veterans will come in and talk or do programs and whatnot. So that's been very successful.
That's in Avon?
Yes.
And so the kids in Avon go to school on Veterans
Yes.
Day, and veterans from your post go in and talk to the class?
Yeah, they do programs for us, and we have like presentation of the colors and introduce ourselves. And the high school used to have one big assembly, and then it got so big that they had to split the assemblies. So instead of the former program, the kids would do audio-visual, and we introduce ourselves, and faculty members that were in the service would introduce themselves, and the kids that had family that were in the service would talk about their grandparents or parent. And it was a good program, but it got so big, the school, that last year, this is our second year we've done this, we went into the school for about a week and talked in teams of two, like two different wars, to history classes, political science classes, humanities classes, world history. So that's been fun. I really enjoy that, and it's helped me. I had trouble speaking, public speaking and whatnot before, and since that was a big step for me to do that. In fact, we had another program the day before September 11th. We spoke to second and third graders. I think they were third graders, about the bad guys in the world and whatnot. The next day, September 11th happened. So that was really, really something. They had a program about the 60s, and we were talking about our military experience and the culture of the 60s,
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Yeah, I kind of wavered between somebody that was not in favor of war, and I think the older I got, the more conservative I got, that I realized that there are these bad guys out there, and we have to be a strong nation. So I'm a supporter of our Commander-in-Chief, President Bush, and the military and their mission in Iraq and Afghanistan. I tell the kids again that, like Vietnam, we're seeing a lot of aiding and abetting the enemy by the media and some of the political activists who are, bad-mouthing the war, and this just gives aid and comfort to the enemy. I mean, we know now that Vietnam was never serious about any of the peace talks that they got involved with. They were just waiting for us to get out, and after a while the move of the country changed so that we were looking for a way to get out, and unfortunately the South Vietnam East were not able to defend themselves after we left, so they were never able to beat us in major battles or on the field, but they won the political war, a war of attrition, I guess. And hopefully the same doesn't happen in Iraq, because there's enemy there are waiting for us to get out of there, and hopefully
How did
the
your
Iraq.
service and experiences affect your life?
Well, considerably. I mean, it even affected my work. I was supposed to go work for the CIA, and when I got married.
Oh yeah, whatever happened to that? You decided not to pursue it?
Well, I was married, and the folks were back here, so we wanted to come back to Connecticut to live and raise a family. So I never made it to Washington, D.C. as a worker. And at the time, when I got out of service, there wasn't a lot of hiring. I was out of work for 10 months as it was, almost.
How else has it affected your life?
Well, again, the experience that I had related to my mother's death, the adjustment problems I had. I was fortunate to get counseling along the way that helped me deal with problems, and I was able to keep a job for 30 years. It was a struggle at times to do some of the things I had to do. Again, speaking was a problem for me. Even reading long articles, I have trouble with that. So between some medication and counseling, for a while there, it wasn't agoraphobia, but I'd get panic attacks if I was out driving somewhere, and you didn't know if you'd get back home or to safety and stuff like that. So fortunately, I was able to get through that, and Did all right. Until now with the impending divorce of my wife. So, but we, we had a successful marriage and raising 3 great kids, and proud and happy about that.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't covered? Either about your military experience or Vietnam?
Well, I have some, again, the training that I got. There was one incident. We had to learn to fire the M16, even though when we got to Vietnam, we never got an M16.
You learned how to fire it back
Yeah,
in
Fort
United
Meade,
States.
right. So I went to the firing range and couldn't hit anything with the M16. But we were walking back to the trailer.
Fort Meade?
Fort Meade, M-E-A-D-E.
Well, when were you there?
Well, I was at Fort Halliburton, outside
Yeah.
of Baltimore, and
Yeah.
that's outside of Washington, in Maryland. But they trucked us over to Fort Meade for M16 firing in preparation to go into
So
Vietnam.
it's just like a day or 2?
Yeah, a day.
Oh.
And so I'm walking back to the trailer with the weapon, and again, the military training. Just out of habit, I pull the bolt back, and out flies a bullet. And I just kept walking along like nothing happened. But if I had gotten the truck in with a bullet chambered in there, they probably would have done the same thing in the truck, in the trailer where they were keeping the weapons. But I would have, they wouldn't have been too happy.
You didn't know you had one in the chamber?
No.
You don't know when you did it? Did someone...
Well, I didn't fire all the rounds.
Oh. And
You
didn't
had
know
a
you
magazine
fired
clip.
them all.
You had a magazine clip. And I thought I had fired all the rounds, and there was still one left in the chamber.
That's really bad.
Well, I don't think they would have liked that. Back
So
in the
nobody knew though, because once it...
I just kept walking like nothing. And just popped out.
So you were never very good with the M14, so it's good to...
I was good with the M14. I was an expert.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
So this was the M16?
M16, yeah, that was the new Colt-made rifle, and I don't know if it wasn't sighted right or what, but didn't do a very good job with it.
Any other stories you can remember? You will when we turn...
Yeah, I know. I guess, one of the things we talk about with the kids are the reception we got back home. And I generally received a good reception and was not knowingly discriminated against, although I may have been. But, people did nice things for me. My wife and I on our honeymoon were at Durgan Park restaurant in Boston. They found out about I was in the service and went on. People bought our meals, paid for our meals there. And some people, you get magazine subscriptions when you're in Vietnam because of the generosity of people. And there were things like that back home, even though it was a tumultuous time, some of the people appreciated what you were doing. Again, 1968 was an incredible year. When I was at Fort Halliburton, we were watching the riots in Chicago, the Democratic National Convention. And again, I knew I was going to Vietnam, and I guess I wanted the war to be over so I wouldn't have to go over there. I was not a gung-ho military type, but I'm glad I served. And in later years, I appreciate my service more. What I did, a lot of guys sought conscientious objector status or went to Canada. I was the first one in my family to be in a war. I'm a first-generation Americans. My parents were immigrants from Canada. 2 of my 3 brothers served in the military, non-war related, but it was a big contribution. My father worked during the war at Landers Ferry Clark, and they just went to war production there. He worked on a machine gun. I have a picture of him with the machine gun and all of the workers were working on the production of that. So And World War II was a total effort in the country. Everybody was involved. And again, I tell the kids this, and Vietnam was different in that at the beginning there was support, but that waned, and 1968 was, again with the riots, was a tough year.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I think I've covered pretty much. I have other stories, I guess. Colorado Springs, at the Air Force Base, you could go to Peterson Field, they call it, and you could hop a ride on a plane back anywhere you wanted. So it was free. So I thought, well, I'm going to visit my future wife, fly home. And I started walking on the tarmac, and I see this nice Lear jet, military jet, 2 engines, small, jet plane. I thought, oh, this is gonna be cool. So we just kept walking past it, and I'm looking at this old DC-3,
That was your
2-engine, 2-engine jet propeller, propeller driven. I don't know if they call them jet props. So, but it was cool because we weren't that high up, and we stopped at Wright-Patterson in Ohio, and then we flew to Andrews Air Force Base outside of Washington. And I had to decide they were going to either Pease Air Force Base I think that's in New Hampshire, or there was one in Cape Cod. I forget the name of that base. So I had to decide. I was going to try to get up to New England and get home somehow from there, or go to fly to Washington. So I slept overnight at my buddy's from basic training. He was part of the old guard that does the Arlington National Cemetery.
Changing of the guard?
Changing the guard, yeah. So I stayed with his wife in their apartment overnight, and took a commercial jet the next day on standby. I think we flew to Providence first, and then to Hartford. And so that was kind of interesting. But I enjoyed that DC-3. And I guess another plane-related incident, in the time I was coming back east again, and they had a air traffic controller strike or whatnot. And so I was stuck in O'Hare in Chicago, which is, and I hadn't flown that much commercially. So we went, I had an opportunity to go to another plane that went to Boston. So I'm thinking, I'm going to get out of Chicago. So I took this plane to Boston. I think I ended up in first class, which was nice. You got free drinks and stuff. So get to Boston, and I didn't have authorized leave. I just took off because I had a long weekend or whatnot. So, and I'd been on the plane waiting on the term, waiting to take off. They had these planes backed up at O'Hare. So I had loosened my military tie and whatnot, and kind of got disheveled. So I'm walking in Logan Airport, and there's these 2 MPs coming at me. And I'm thinking, oh shit, if they stop me for, see my leave slip authorization, I'm in trouble. And here I am all disheveled, loose tie, whatnot. So they came up to me and were walking by, kind of said, "Fix your tie." And that was it. They kept walking. But I could have gotten a little bit of trouble there. Then Major Stein, I almost got court-martialed. He and I were having problems, and I think part of it was I wouldn't trade watches with him. But I was working at night up at my office writing letters and stuff, and he came with this sergeant, and they wanted me to, at the time I was supposed to be exempt from duty. I was exempt from duty, from guard and detail and stuff, because again I was the intelligence summary writer. And they said, you're going to go on that, and I was kind of objecting because I was supposed to be exempt. it was a pain to, pull duty. So I started arguing, and he said to me, if you say one more word, I'm going to put you up for court-martial for insubordination. And it was like it was at the tip of my tongue, to say something, and I just kept my mouth, fortunately. I don't know if he would have followed up on him, but again, nobody liked him anyway, and he was just an awful guy. But he was a West Point grad. And so again, discretion and valor, kept my mouth shut. But might have ended up at Long Bin Jail, or they used to call it LBJ after the president too, Long Bin Jail. So there's, in the service there are a lot of instances. Like when we drove back from Colorado, the air in Colorado was thinner, so the car wasn't. I had an old '54 Falcon, and the thing wasn't running right. I don't know if we were in Kansas by the time we having trouble. Get off the highway and find a gas station garage, and there was an older man and his daughter working there, and they looked at the car, and I think I might have said something. I was just out of the service, or I was out of the service then, going home to Connecticut, and so he adjusted the carburation or something, didn't charge me, which was nice. So again, there were things people did for you. For some reason, when I came on emergency leave, I wanted to fly nonstop across country. So I was in San Francisco, and there were no nonstop flights. So I said, well, I'll fly to Los Angeles. It was American Airlines. Fly to Los Angeles and then fly nonstop. I didn't realize how far San Francisco was from. It was like a 2-hour flight, or an hour. It was a long flight to Los Angeles. I forget how long it took, but even there, the guy at the American Airlines let me call home for using their phone to tell him, where I was. And I was coming back for a funeral, my mother's funeral. So, there are instances where even when the war was unpopular, that people did nice things for you. Fortunately, I never encountered knowingly any discrimination. And I know a lot of guys from Vietnam spat at and called names and whatnot. But,
Well, Donald, I'd like to thank you for sharing your story and your experience, and thank you for your service for our country.
You're welcome.